Okay. I'll introduce myself again. That's cool. So Jay, Senior Student Success Specialist here at the Fro. What that looks like is I do academic advising and event planning, like stuff like this, with the support of my team. Who else wants to go?
I can go. Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia. I'm also a Senior Student Success Specialist in the office, and I'm basically a replicate role of Jay. So glad to have y'all here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle, and I'm a Student Success Specialist in the office as well.
Okay, and I'm Mikayla Crawford. I'm a work study student here at the Fro as well.
Awesome. And we have some other folks in the room, but they are just here as participants. This is the folks that are here and working as staff at the moment. But without further ado, Mikayla, you want to take it away from here?
Yes.
Awesome.
Great. Okay, so first I wanted to thank you, Dr. Cox, for being here and even writing this book. Everything that you put in this book I resonated with deeply. So I thank you for being able to put some of my feelings in words. So I thank you for that. And if you wanted to, I wanted to give you the opportunity, if you wanted to introduce yourself and give some background about the book and about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Joy Cox. I am excited to be here. I am long-winded, so when people say, tell me a little bit about yourself, it's never a little. But I'm definitely grateful to be here, happy to be here, and excited to know that the book has resonated with so many individuals and the people who are on this call. I mean, my passion for writing the book was for community. And so, you know, it does my heart a lot of good to know that people are actually benefiting from it. I currently reside in New Jersey, just purchased a house, closed today. To be able to move in at least today. So super excited about that. And I work at the Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. And so I am in the midst of the medical field and medical professionals where fatphobia kind of runs rampant. And so but super excited to have outlets like this where we can chop it up, talk about things, not cold switch, and just be real with ourselves and with each other. And so, yeah, I'm excited. I'm sure I'll talk a little bit more. So I'll digress now.
Thank you. Okay, well, to get started, I just wanted to share something that a part of the book that I resonated with, and to just let you know what that was. And when you were talking about your dad, the conversation that you had with your dad when you were younger, and he mentioned that he would have to stop picking you up. I had a similar experience with that with one of my aunties in the room. So for you to be able to put that down and like almost to a T, exactly the same conversation that I've had was really eye-opening for me to see that I think that I'm not alone, and a lot of kids, a lot of us Black people, Black women go through that same conversation at the same point. So, and so my first question I wanted to ask you is, how would you say that fatphobia and anti-Blackness are connected?
So, I mean, I think that, you know, when we start to look at historically the roots of fatphobia, you can't really look at that without looking at the impact of racism. And so Dr. Sabrina Strings kind of talks about this at length in her Fearing the Black Body, and talking about the roots of fatphobia and how, you know, fatphobia actually emerged during the transatlantic slave trade, and how fatphobia was actually used to characterize Black people as lazy, as not doing enough, eating more than their share, as being morally bad and wrong, right? And so this idea that you could reach purity through whiteness and restriction kind of emerged during that time. And so when we start to learn about the roots of fatphobia, we find that it's attached to anti-Blackness and attached to racism. And we see depictions of this every day, right? So we talk about the mammy stereotype often, which is definitely a form of anti-Blackness. Norbit comes to mind in a number of ways, in thinking about the ways that anti-Blackness is kind of embodied through larger bodies, or depicted as embodied through larger bodies. Precious would be another one, right? This idea that Black people in particularly are morally wrong. Black people are overzealous when it comes to food. They have no restriction. They have no self-control, things of that nature. And so when looking at the roots of fatphobia, I don't think that you can actually look at that and be honest without talking about racism and anti-Blackness.
Yes, and I definitely see those in the examples you gave. Yes, I see that wholeheartedly there. So my next question would be, what is fat liberation and how can students model it?
Yeah, so I think, fat liberation can be a number of things. I think one of the cool things about, when we talk about liberation and we talk about freedom, one of the questions I used to ask people a lot of times is like, what does freedom look like to you? Right? What does liberation look like to you? I don't think that there's one set definition of what fat liberation looks like, because I think that because of where fat phobia kind of stems from and people's different lived experiences, they have a different view of what liberation looks like to them. And so for some people, fat liberation looks like crop tops and Daisy Dukes, right? For other people, fat liberation looks like creating this platform for yourself where you have this voice, where you can share your ideas and share your thoughts. For some people, fat liberation looks a lot like nurturing, right? Having that real balance and being able to embrace people and embrace yourself and embrace others, right? Like this healing aspect to kind of restoring the things that have been ripped and torn from other people's lives. And so for me, I think, at least for me, fat liberation is a little bit of all of those things. It's about being true to myself and not allowing the size of my body to inhibit that, and not allowing anybody else to create boundaries for me that I haven't set for myself. And I think that, the way that students can kind of embody those things, I think at the heart and at the core of everything that you do, you got to ask yourself why it matters to you. What's important to you, right? Fat liberation, a lot of that is about tapping back within yourself and remaining true to yourself. And if that's wearing crop tops, then do that. Right? If that's sharing your voice, then do that. If that's raising awareness, if that's taking up for other people, right? Because it doesn't have to just be larger people who participate in fat liberation. You can be a smaller body individual and present yourself as an advocate. I don't like the word, ally. I hear people say like co-conspirator. You can present yourself in that way and fight on behalf of other people. But at the heart of it, right, it's about you being true to yourself, despite all of the other noise that's happening around you.
Okay, and how did you begin to unlearn messages about fatness? Like, what process did you go through for that?
A number of different processes. I don't think it was just one thing. And I think that oftentimes, when we talk about body positivity, when we talk about fat acceptance, it almost seems like it's a destination or space of arrival where people are like, boom, I practice fat acceptance, so I never have bad body image days, or I never have these times where I have to sit myself down and walk myself back through the things that I've already learned. Because the truth of the matter is that those things do still happen. There are days that you may look in the mirror and be like, ugh, like, I wish this looked different, or I wish that I had these things. And you may catch yourself in the process and say, okay, but what is that, right? What is speaking loud right now, and how can you quiet that voice? But I feel like for me, the processes to liberation, there's been several, and they all deal with different contexts, right? So what does it look like to find my voice as someone kind of walking through these processes and being able to tell doctors like, no, like I'm not going to do these things, right? Like I'm not going to restrict my diet. I'm not going to, I'm not going to harm myself to suffice you. And that was a process in and of itself. For me to have to stand on my own 2 feet against family members, that was another process, right? Another avenue of taking courage and being able to speak up for myself, right? And then, to really look in the mirror and value what I seen looking back at me. That's a different process, to genuinely appreciate my curves, my hips, all of that stuff. That's a process. To learn how to accept when someone else genuinely appreciates that, different process. So I think for me, it's been a number of processes that have kind of taken me on this journey to this point to where I'm like, okay, I'm good, right? And then there are days when I have to remind myself, we're not going back to X, right? Like we're not going back down that path. Because like I said, there are days when you find yourself stuck in that place. But I think the blessing of going through the process is that you're equipped to kind of handle the journey. And if you're not equipped, gratefully, there's also communities that can kind of help pull you through.
Great. And okay, so then you mentioned that weight stigma is more deadly than the weight itself. Can you kind of expand on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about how fat causes diseases, how fat, leads to sickness and all of those things. But when you look at the research, there's not research that actually supports that notion that fat causes anything. Fatness is typically assumed to be a factor, but that's because of weight stigma. And so when we start to think about the ways by which weight stigma impacts the daily livings of individuals who live in larger bodies, like you're more likely to suffer from weight stigma than you are from disease. You're more likely to suffer from the emotional impacts of weight stigma. So, that leaves a stain on people's lives, right? And then you have low self-esteem. There was actually a study that was done that when acceptance was practiced among people who live in larger bodies, they were more likely to try other things. And so this idea of tough love, this idea of being able to shame people into change, research doesn't support that. And that's really what weight stigma is, right? It puts the onus back on the individual and blames them for kind of, for what society deems as being bad or deviant in their lives. And so for me, and also representative of research, weight stigma tends to be more harmful than weight itself. You can be a perfectly well individual who lives in a larger body, who works out, who eats your vegetables and keeps yourself, keeps your body moving and all of those things. But that doesn't shield you from weight stigma. And it doesn't shield you from the impacts of that, which include discrimination and barriers and all of that, all of those other things.
Right. So then actually mentioning that with the stigma, there's a lot of microaggressions that are often communicated like genuine concerns or well-being. Can people, like you were saying, be well and fat?
Yeah. You're looking at one. I think people absolutely can be well and fat. I think that research would say that people can be well and fat. And when we start to look at holistic wellness, as opposed to what just numbers on the scale say, I think then that number enlarges itself. There are a number of people who live in smaller bodies who are not happy with themselves. A number of people who live in smaller bodies who also suffer from depression, right? But oftentimes when you are looking at them from a medical standpoint, one would say that they are healthy. And then there are a number of fat people who are running marathons, who are weightlifting, who are playing sports, who are being active, and they are not given that credit of what it means to be healthy because of the way that their bodies present in society. And so there are a number or a large community of fat people who are well and also live in a larger body. So it can definitely be possible, and it is being done, definitely being, achieved. I don't want to use that word, but because I feel like health is not something that you necessarily achieve. But there are people who are fat and well.
So, and in your book, you also mentioned this a lot. So I actually wanted to know, how do you deal with microaggressions that you sometimes receive, especially when people are trying to give you unwanted health advice? How do you deal with that?
Sometimes I just call it out. I mean, there's no point in sugarcoating it, right? Like, Mary Poppins, I'm dating myself, but Mary Poppins sang that song, just a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, right? But I'm not sick and I don't need that type of sugar. So, if you're going to say something, say it with your chest, right? But, sometimes I just call it out. Like, no, I'm not pretty for a big girl. I'm just pretty, and that's good enough. And then I think too, sometimes the flip side to that is that because weight stigma is so ingrained in society, oftentimes people participate in it and they don't even know, right? So to them, they are actually, in their minds, they're kind of giving you this sense of, it's a compliment, right? It's genuine concern. It's very well-meaning, but a microaggression is a microaggression, and if we don't call them out, then nobody will fix them or will change them. And so for me, if it's not me calling it out, just putting it out there, it may also be me ignoring it and kind of brushing it off. One of the things that I often tell people is to think about how much energy you want to give to a thing. Oftentimes being in this space, particularly in activist spaces where there's a lot of pushback, you'll find yourself always fighting, right? There's always something to fight every day. Somebody always has a problem with the way that you live your life. And so I often tell people to think about the type of energy that you want to put into this thing. Think about it. And if you feel like you're going to be up to it, because it never just stops at the correction. It never just stops at that calling out the microaggression. You're going to have to dig deep, right? And then sometimes there's repercussions to that. And are you prepared to kind of handle those repercussions? And so really think about the type of energy that you want to put into a thing. And then you do whatever helps to maintain your peace, right? Because at the end of the day, you got to live with you. And people will stress you out, watch you flip out, and then go home and laugh about it. And you're the one that's left carrying the burden of that. So you want to ask yourself, is it worth it? And so, me, I do a lot of weighing of scales. I pick my battles, and I call out when it's necessary. And then other times, it's like, Joy, let it go. Let it go. Because at the end of the day, you will be mad and they're going to forget about it. And so, some things aren't necessarily worth fighting about.
Great, I need that. So yes, thank you. So I think one of my last questions that I have for now is, what did it feel like to stop policing yourself with healthism and fat respectability politics?
It felt great. It felt like I could breathe. I think that depending on where you land in this conversation, knowing that you could, eat something and not feel bad about it, eat something and not have to worry about working it off, running it off, making up for it later. For some people, like, that's a huge relief. And one of the things that I think, one of the biggest things that I think has blessed my life as it relates to rejecting the idea of healthism is that I've learned how to be kinder to myself. We practice a lot of kindness with one another in community. We know how to tell each other when we do something bad, it's okay, it's not the worst thing, you'll get better, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, I had a very hard time doing that for myself. And so being able to kind of accept myself and reject this idea of healthism helped me to be kinder with me. Like, it's your body, you're good, you know, you want to rest, you don't need to work out every day. You don't need to, you know, it doesn't count if you know, if it's not high intensity interval training, right? You know, those types of things. And so it really allowed me to embrace myself as a human, right? And not as this machine that was working to achieve a goal that was set in place by someone else, right? With the promise of deliverables that never really panned out. Everything that I've achieved thus far in my life has been achieved with all these roles on my body. And so to kind of dispel the myth that you had to become something else to have greatness means the world to me.
Yes, that's so important. That's really good. That's great. And so then I want to also open it up to anyone else who would have questions too. I still have some more, but if anyone else has questions too that they'd like to ask, please feel free.
So,
Can I ask one real quick?
oh yeah, go ahead, Dana.
So do you have any other examples of microaggressions, like other than a person like trying to be helpful?
I mean, I think that microaggressions show up in a number of different ways. I don't think that they just show up when people are attempting to be helpful, but I think that there is this interplay of compliment, or like it's a backhanded type of statement that's often made. And so I don't think that it just shows up like, oh, you're so pretty for a big girl, or, you know, I used to have people say things like, well, I think this is kind of a compliment too, but the assumption that because I was fat, I knew how to cook. Now, granted, I went to school for culinary arts, but that's besides the point because people didn't know that. So this assumption that like you're larger, so it's like, oh, your husband will love you, not because you're you, but because like you could cook well, good meals. I think there's a lot of like growing up, there was a lot of like, you're the strong one. You're the one that everybody else is supposed to rely on. So like the ramification of being a kid and being looked at as like, you're the one that everybody else, like you're the support, right? But I don't know, I'm trying to think maybe off the top of my head, because I think those are all things that are often said in very kind ways that like, if you don't catch it, you're like, oh, thanks so much. Like, I appreciate that. That's really nice of you to say. And it wasn't until I got older that I started to realize like, these are not compliments. Like, these are people putting characteristics and ideas on me and my identity based on the size of my body. I mean, I could think about it. If I come back to some, I'm happy to drop them. But I think everything that I gave you so far might have presented itself that looked a bit more like, yeah, those are definitely like compliments.
Can I actually expand this question a bit?
Yeah.
Mostly because I feel like in questions when we get asked about, like, as Black people about microaggressions, we often like go to the things people are trying to be benevolent. But I also am wondering if there are larger aggressions that maybe we also could bring into conversation. Something that stuck out to me in the book was the sermon and the kind of the fatphobia that was given out and doled out in church. That struck a chord with me and it hurt a little too much. But but would you mind kind of bringing that into space as well?
Well, I think that there is a certain assumption that if you're deemed as morally bad or wrong, right? People have a right to treat you however, right? Like, they don't have to respect your boundaries. I've often heard of people who have gone shopping in supermarkets, people who live in larger bodies, and people walk past their carts and take food out. they tell them, no, you don't need this. Right? So maybe that's a microaggression that's a little bit, like I see that as super aggressive, right? But there would be somebody that's like, no, you don't need this Pepsi, right? Like, take it out your cart. But I think that the aggression that fat people typically face is because their humanity is often stripped in the eyes of society. And so they're not deemed to be worthy of grace. And so then that's why you have things like sermons like that, right? That kind of get preached over the pulpit, where you can openly deride fat people, and people will clap about it, and people will shout on it. And people will say that, they are going to change their eating habits to be more pleasing to God because of it. And so I think like the more aggressive, I often talk about Mike Brown and the story that was told by the officer, that he charged at him like a bull and all of these things, and put his head down, and I thought to myself, I said, part of the reason why society was so quick to jump on that and to believe it was in part due to Mike Brown's size, right? If it was his friend that was with him and they said, oh, he charged at him like a bull, et cetera, it'd be a little bit harder to believe. And so the aggression that's often given towards fat people is because of that sense of like your humanity is stripped. I can say whatever I want to say to you, right? That's why, people can walk and grab. I've seen people grab people rolls in midday, right? What you gonna do with all this? What is this? What you gonna do with this? How's this gonna change, right? Why you letting all this hang out? Why do you feel like you have space to touch somebody like that, right? And I think that, a lot of the aggression stems from that idea that we are morally deviant, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, and that people can take whatever means necessary to ensure that we are going to be compliant. There was a few years ago, there was the ex-football star who made the little girl do sit-ups until she died. She was rushed to the hospital. She was 5 years old. And he talked about how she was out of shape and how she needed to get fit. And he made her do sit-ups. And then they rushed her to the hospital. She passed away. This idea that like you can treat fat people, even fat kids, any type of way, as long as it aligns with them not being fat anymore. So, I think there's probably a lot more instances of like just open aggression, right? For a while, like the people of Walmart, right? When that was like super popular on Facebook, fat people plastered all up and down. Like, why do you feel like that's okay? You want to take a picture of somebody, shopping and ridicule them because of their body? Because you feel like you can, right? Because you feel like they're not due that humanity. They're not due that dignity, And if this means that they'll see themselves on social media and that they'll finally get their life together and they'll start eating healthy and they'll lose weight, then your job is done for today.
So another question to kind of go off of that, at the beginning of the interview, you were kind of mentioning movies like Precious and other movies like Norbit. How big of a role do you think that media plays in the way that we perceive big people, bigger people, fat people?
I feel like the media is like, that's the right-hand man of all messages, right? And so, one of the things, if you look at how media is now being portrayed as it relates to larger bodies, I think you also see the power of media in the pull that it has on individuals. So imagine what that's like. I remember years ago when Gabby Sibbity did like the love scene. Was that Power? I think she was on Power. There was like a love scene that she did. People was flipping out. They couldn't believe that like a Black woman was like about to be intimate, a fat Black woman, a fat Black dark-skinned woman was about to be intimate on TV. If you think, like, you look at even the movies that we like a lot. I forget what's the name of the movie with Queen Latifah and Common. I forget the name. Y'all know the movie I'm talking about.
Yes, yeah.
But if you look at that, right, and you look at how far they go as it relates to being intimate before they cover everybody up, before they change and switch scenes. And so there is this idea, I think, in media, ideas that get purported to society that says fat is bad, fat is not attractive, fat is unhealthy, fat can be equal to sickness, fat can be equal to what it means to be unsuccessful. Like, one of the biggest ploys as it relates to media is that we tie smaller bodies to success, right? And so oftentimes, something that I learned is that when people are fighting against you, they're not fighting necessarily against the idea of fatness alone. They're fighting against the ideology of everything that's been attached to thinness. So if you tell people that you don't have to be thin, what you're really also telling them, right? You're messing up this image of everything that they've equated thinness to. So for them, that may be success, that may be promotions, that may be a family, that may be a positive relationship, like romantic relationships and all of those things. And so if I say I accept my body as is, then I'm also, to some people, am saying that I'm okay with being unsuccessful. And we don't always tie the connections between. And so, you know, with me, what I noticed is that I was like combating a whole ideology about success and what that meant to people when I said, oh, you don't have to lose weight to be accepted. Right here I am showing up bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, telling people, you know, oh, but you know, you could accept yourself the way that, you know, the way that you are. And what they hear is failure, 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 failure. But media helps to send that message all day, every day. I mean, I think if you think about what you've ever wanted in life, anything that would denote any, you know, any type of a success, you've probably seen a thin person with it.
I'm sorry. I feel like we got to the Q&A function, but I don't feel like this question has one of the categories. You mentioned in the book body diversity. And what that looked like being modeled in the home. I'm wondering, we've talked about what fat liberation looks like, but what, if you don't mind defining, what is body diversity?
Body diversity is simply, I think, what it sounds like. It's the diversification of how bodies are presented in society. So you got short bodies, you got tall bodies, you got stout bodies, you got smaller bodies, you got mid-sized bodies, right? You got bodies with 2 arms, you got bodies with 1 arm, you got bodies with no arms, you got bodies with different shades, right, of blackness, and different other shades too. But you have, you know, a diversity of what the human body could be, and that's a thing, right? And that's a thing that should be respected, that's a thing that should be honored. But we tend to push in our, you know, in our society, like there's only, like, yes, there are many bodies, but there's only one body that really counts. There's only one type of body that really counts, right? And then with every body that's different, you get a little bit further away from humanity. You get a little bit further away from what's considered normal, right? And so when you think about Black people as a whole, our noses aren't considered the norm. Our lips aren't considered the norm. Our cheekbones aren't considered the norm. Our skin tone isn't considered the norm. The texture of our hair isn't considered the norm. And then we look and we say, well, what is the norm, right? If we want to be normal, what does that look like? And it's something that we can't obtain. So if you really think about the way that white supremacy works, right, it's like they make a rule that only that only they can be a part of, and everybody else gets kicked out. And so body diversity kind of spits in the face of that. Body diversity says, no, all bodies matter, all bodies count, all bodies are valuable, right? And all bodies are beautiful in their own way, right? And so, you know, why would you use the same measurement that, you know, based on straight hair that you would for curly hair? That just don't make sense, right? Nobody does that. If you are somebody who bakes, anybody bakes? Wave at me. Right? We all know one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is using a dry baking measurement to measure liquid, because it don't work, right? But here we are, we have this one measurement that we keep trying to squeeze everybody else into. And then we're like, no, you don't match, you don't mix, you don't mix, whatever. How you know I'm not bread and they are cookies? Let them people be cookies and let me be bread. Why can't they be muffins, right? Ain't nothing wrong with muffins. We all love muffins, right? And so there's this sense of, that's what body diversity does. I love a muffin, I love a cookie, I love some bread, okay? I love lemon bread, unleavened bread, you know, the whole 9 yards. I might want a crepe, right? But nobody's counted out in that space. And so that's what body diversity is to me.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Just for the sake of time, I want to make sure that we can open up some of our themes. I'm gonna just say this at this point, though, we've kind of gotten to past the meat and potatoes. We've gotten into the sides too. If we don't hear the guidelines of what we had originally intended, these are the themes that we had initially talked about separating this next section into. I'm just going to really emphasize that third point, or the second bullet. These are meant to inspire points for conversation, and we can ask the questions that are on the next slides if no one has questions for themselves. But we're going to let this conversation flow up until 5:30.
Talk to me, y'all. Talk to me. I like to talk. Y'all can't tell them. I told you I was long-winded. Sorry.
All right, I'm gonna just go ahead and open up to our acceptance prompts. Patricia and I are here if you want us to voice your question. I also have the participant tab open so I can see if you want to raise your hand, if you have some questions. Well, Dr. Cox, I think you've already answered the first question. Do you mind? How do you disrupt the dream fatphobia sells us while giving yourself peace? And maybe the second half is what we haven't asked so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I think, to be honest, it's an uphill battle. I mean, I think if I were to be honest, because I can stand in the mirror all day and I can love myself and I can love all my curves and I can love all the beauty that I bring to myself and cherish what I bring to other people, still walk outside and be called a fat bitch from somebody riding in the car. You know, I can still do all of those great things and still, you know, be given a runaround at the doctor's office. And so, you know, some of the things, you know, sometimes I think, you know, just taking solace in the fact that I am okay, you know, like not too long ago, I had an incident with a doctor where, you know, she wound up running a test that she didn't need to run and like took me through hoops. I had to go see a cardiologist. I had to do all of these other things. And then the test comes back and there's nothing wrong. And, you know, and I take solace in that. Like, soon as I got out that office, she was one of the first people I hit up. Dr. So-and-so, just want to let you know, they said that my heart is in pristine condition, right? Because sometimes, you know, people don't believe you. My mom had this saying that you don't believe it stinks until you stick your nose in it. And so people will push you until they have to they get a taste of their own medicine, right? And so sometimes me, giving myself peace or taking solace in where I am is that, what I'm saying is factual. What I'm saying is actual, and it doesn't matter if the rest of the world agrees or not. And sometimes that is the extent to which I have peace, is to say, like, I have the test right here to say what I've been saying. And that's what gives me peace. And then there's other times when, definitely seeing other people access their own dreams, accessing their own liberation, I think fills me in ways that sometimes is indescribable. And I think that is part of disrupting, the lies that fatphobia sells. And then also being able to draw from their strength and seeing them win gives me peace. And it's saying, okay, I know that somebody else is okay. And so, I think that it ebbs and flows, as most work, I think, in activist spaces do. Sometimes you are confronted with a lot of heartache and a lot of trauma, along this journey, but you push on because of what you believe in, and you've done the work. And so yeah, I would say that sometimes there's small wins, sometimes there's big wins, but I try to draw on those things, because weight stigma is everywhere, fatphobia is everywhere. And so, I take the little wins and the big ones too.
Thank you. I think you answered the second question earlier in our talk as well. And then for the sake of time, I don't mind moving past this slide, but I want to open it up to folks if we have any questions about acceptance. I don't want to say speak now, forever hold your peace, but it might be that moment. So. All right. Okay. So a comment we have in the chat is, one relatively simple if painful thing is pushing back in conversation when someone uses fat as an insult, especially towards yourself, or I'm also assuming towards themselves, the person speaking. That's 100%. I hear that. I feel that. Dr. Cox, do you have any response to that?
I mean, I think that's true. And then I also add, I see a lot of people saying, like, okay, well, what else can you call me at this point? Like, I woke up this morning and I knew that I was fat. Because I think that there are a lot of people who use that as a way, like, the idea oftentimes when that happens is to get you to shut up and close inward. They want you to stop talking. They want you to stop doing whatever it is that you do. So they throw the insult. And, typically the insult has been designed to kind of stop you in your tracks. But I've also learned, that people, have also shown up and been like, so, like, what else can you tell me that I don't already know? And I've watched, like, those conversations turn, like, then those people have nothing left to say. So I think, that tool often being used as well is like, there's a way to, or I should say that people are finding ways to equip themselves against that insult. Because people use it and they throw it around because it's supposed to be hurtful. But if you're in a space of acceptance and liberation, it's not as hurtful as people think that it's going to be. And fat is like, for some people, fat is the worst thing to be called ever. But it's almost like, again, I'm dating myself, so I apologize for this. But when, so we've all seen The Last Dragon, like the final scenes. Y'all haven't seen The Last Dragon with Bruce Leroy? Oh my, okay. Okay. Well, we're gonna look it up afterwards, right? But there's a point in the scene in the movie where the villain has like the glow. They call it the glow, right? And like he's fighting or whatever. And like Bruce Leroy is like the underdog, but the villain is like beating him. And then Bruce Leroy starts to find his inner strength. And then he starts to glow. And then he outglows the villain, and then he beats the villain down. And so I feel like oftentimes that's what people do. Like they use that insult of fatness, and then they start to glow, right? And it's like, oh, they have all the power. But like when you start to harness your own strength, then you start to grow, and then you start to fight back, and it actually defeats them because their idea was that they thought that they could take you out with that insult.
I'm pretty confident you answered the question on a different slide.
Dragon. Okay. I mean, it came out in the 80s, so that's fair.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
If it's cool with y'all, I'm gonna head to the next slide and have some questions about community. Again, these ones on the slide are just for inspiration. I do have a personal favorite on this slide, but I would love to hear from our students. While we're waiting, Dr. Cox, would you mind answering the second question?
Okay.
I don't mind voicing it. Language helps us communicate the values of our society. What has African American vernacular English taught you about fatness?
Oh, that we have terminologies for days about fatness. We have different ways of explaining what fatness is and how it shows up, what it looks like, right? It doesn't take long for you to figure out that there's a difference between thickness and fatness. You know, it doesn't take long for you to understand the expectations of family and of community and what that means. You know, the idea of like Big Mama, like why Big Mama out of all, you know, there's an expectation of comfort with those things. You know, I think that while fatness can also be demonized in our community, that there's also pockets of our community that find it very welcoming and accepting. And I think we have a way of explaining that, right? And so I kind of talk about in the book about the cornbread and the greens, the expectation of what it means to partake in meals and eat and food and do those things within Black communities, how we talk about that, what that, you know, what that means to us. Because oftentimes, you know, I've heard, you know, when we talk about preparing meals for the people that you really care about and love, right? And you are going to make peach cobbler, right? You ain't making no peach cobbler with no margin, right? You go out and you get the best ingredients, right? You're going to get the butter. You're buying the butter. You're spending the extra $1 or so to do, you know, to do those things. And I think that talking about how we interact with one another in our own way, with our own use of language, you know, it's taught me a lot about fatness. Sometimes in our community, it can be a double-edged sword. But I love us for, you know, not for the reason that it's a double-edged sword, but I love us for the way that we talk about things, the way that we term things, how we find community through the language that we share with one another, and what that means to us, and how we connect with one another through that. And so as it relates to fatness, you know, I think I would be dishonest if I didn't say that fatphobia shows up in Black communities through our own use of language, right? How we deem bodies to be acceptable or unacceptable through our own use of language. But at the same time, I think we've also created lanes for ourselves where we can talk about our bodies. And that's within even Black fat communities, right? Like how we talk about our bodies, how we talk about, you know, when we talk about big belly energy, excuse me, and things of that nature, right? That kind of stems from the language that we use. And so, you know, I found that it can be a very loving space. Like we create our own definitions, we create our own words to create a reality that we are living and that we see. And I think that that's awesome.
Thank you. You know, I 100% agree. I feel like AAVE is a double-edged sword when it comes to fatness. I definitely have found words for comfort and some other stuff.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from students on this slide? Totally acceptable. If not, I totally understand. Alrighty, we're gonna move forward on the next slide. I just am loving how much in alignment all this conversation has been and how we're using language to just move right on through. Oh, thank you so much for being here, Danielle. So we have these questions here as prompts. And I feel like we have touched on definitely the first question. If I can prioritize the last 3 minutes that we have, Dr. Cox, if there's something that you could say to students that are interested in research.
Yeah, so I think, you know, ethical research, what does it look like while studying marginalized populations? It looks like building relationships. It looks like not using them as tools of measurement to get the answers that you want and then dip once you got them. It looks like, you know, giving back, right? So I've gotten this information from you. How can I show up for you? And sometimes in the smallest ways, that's like, hey, this is what I found. You know, it's mind-blowing in a lot of ways how there's so many researchers who don't go back to the communities that they extract data from to be like, hey, this is what we found about this thing that we asked you about. One of the reasons why, I think it's chapter 7 in my book, you know, I plug everybody that I possibly could during that time who I knew was doing work around fat liberation in a number of different contexts, because and being in community with one another, you've taken so much, right? And that's not like to say like, oh, you're a hoarder, but it's like just from being in community, right? Like you absorb so much wisdom, understanding, knowledge, know-how, laughs, jokes, whatever it is from everyone. And so to have an opportunity to give back, I think that's what ethical research looks like. To give credit when credit's due, that's what ethical research looks like. And I think that research can definitely be a tool for resistance and social evolution. One of the things that I wanted to make sure of whenever I did my thesis, my master's thesis, and then also my dissertation, was that the story of Black people would be told, period. You got to print it, you got to write it, you got to put it somewhere. And I knew that my dissertation would be, you know, be represented in that. I knew that my thesis, my master's thesis, would be representative of that. And so, you know, you can read 1,000 articles where nobody showed up for fat Black girls, but my book is in print. So it's there, right? And so that was one way that I seen kind of making a mark for myself. I apologize, it's 7:30 here on the East Coast, so I'm noticing that I'm getting darker and darker as the night persists. Yes, you could turn on the light. And so, you know, I definitely think that research can be used as a tool of resistance. You know, one of the things about having letters behind your name is that you are equipped to kind of go out and do research the way that you want to do research. Once you learn the methodology, you know, and I also realized that you don't necessarily have to write for academic audiences. Research is research is research. You know what I mean? Put it in the hands of the people who need to hear it and know it most. And by doing so, you can propel the message that you want sent to the audiences that you desire to speak to. And so I think all of those things kind of play a part. But I think, you know, we are missing those components a lot when we start to deal with marginalized populations. The issue of not giving back, not giving recognition, not being ethical, and not really utilizing our skill set to push forward the work that's already being done.
Thank you so much. We have reached the close of our hour with Dr. Cox, but I do again want to give a special thank you to everyone who is here, to our partners that provided books to students, Africana Studies, our program currently that hopefully will be a department soon come. And a special thank you again to our Black cultural centers that are in the audience. So for Upper Main Cultural Center at UNCW, the Neil Marshall Cultural Center at Indiana University, and the Black Cultural Center at Purdue University. This has been Fat Girls and Black Bodies from African American Student Services and Africana Studies program here at UNM, and with Dr. Cox, and interviewing by Mikayla Crawford. Thank you so much for your time, y'all. Whoop, whoop. All right,